I'm a global fellow at HITLAB, and I'm also head of regulatory affairs at Ellume, which is a digital diagnostic company. Angela Radcliffe brings a tremendous amount of experience and breadth of experience in value-based care in intersecting areas, clinical research, as well as on both sides of patient engagement. And as a advocate and transformation advocate for value-based care and clinical research and digital health. So Angela, welcome to this segment. I'd really been excited to join this discussion with you. And if you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Zina. It's so nice to see you and Stan and Jerry, the whole crew here. It's really hard to follow a Ted Lasso image, but I'll do my best. For those who don't know my story, back in 2001, my career had largely been focused in the payer space and the commercial side of pharma. I worked for Cardinal Health and United Healthcare and a couple of boutique med ed firms. And then in 2001, one of my younger siblings was serving as a chaplain in the US Army over in Korea. And he was 21 years old, and he got out of a pool and he died. No sign or symptom, healthiest of all 6 of us kids. And after that happened, thanks to a very kind physician in the military, our family was connected to a clinical research trial that found the gene for long QT, which is a heart arrhythmia, in our family. And that clinical research trial went on to save many, many lives in our family. We're probably up over 100 at this point, because if you know you have the gene, there are things you can do to prevent sudden death. So I found that to be an incredibly transformational opportunity. And I said, well, I'm doing the wrong thing. And I picked up the phone and I started calling people in the network. And that's why this network is so important to us. And I landed myself a job in patient recruitment for clinical trials. And I really had to sort of start from scratch and work my way up. But as I went through the work, I, of course, over time, like many of you, realized the power that digital and data actually has in making a difference for clinical research and getting people to participate, understand, and that the websites and brochures and ads that we were doing just weren't having the impact I was looking for. So, since that time, I've really focused and dedicated my career to trying to find that intersection between digital health and data and that human aspect, that empathy, that place that we all have as patients, even while we're going about and doing our day-to-day jobs.
Really amazing, Angela, and I think you really bring forward the human aspect of why we collect data and why it's so important to look towards value-based care, because of course that does bring the benefit, and you need that data to bring that benefit forward. And so, in your experience with evidence-based clinical research and kind of shaping practices and interventions, how do you see this coming into play with value-based care systems?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a movement started, I have to say at least 10 years ago, because we all have to add pandemic time. So maybe it was 15 years ago at this point, that a lot of you have heard of probably, which is clinical research as a care option. Jennifer Byrne was one of the pioneers of that. People like her, people like Craig Lipset, Irfan Khan. We have a lot of amazing people sort of out there doing the work of clinical research as a care option. And of course, what that means is, if you are going to go on Google to buy a pair of shoes, you can put in, I need a pair of blue shoes, size 7, I want a low heel, I want it this color blue, and you get all of these options back to you. But if you are a patient, especially a patient who has limited access to all of the different arms of our healthcare system, maybe you grew up like me and you only had access to community health clinics in rural settings, you don't go type in, I have a migraine, and suddenly options like Excedrin plus, a prescription Midrin plus change this aspect of your diet plus these 2 clinical research studies that are on migraine, and maybe you should participate. And there's a lot of reasons I think that it took a long time for people to recognize clinical research as a care option. And there's still a lot of detractors for the concept, because there are people who still say, well, this is experimental. We can't, promise people that we're going to help them and improve outcomes with clinical research. But in fact, a lot of research has shown us that patient outcomes improve exponentially when patients are exposed to clinical research participation, and not necessarily for the condition that they're being cared for. In many cases, their outcomes improve because they're being seen by a more holistic, robust health team that gives them a higher level of attention and service than they might have normally through their other care channels. So to me, it's a real travesty that we haven't really made this a reality, but it's also not a surprise because our system is built with incentives that don't make clinical research as a care option work very easily. And the business of a regulated clinical trial and conducting that as care versus the type of care that you get in a traditional care setting, it's not the same. But it's a huge opportunity for us to improve diversity in clinical trials. It's a huge opportunity for us to have a better economic outcome. So I think we need to be looking harder at finding a way to make it a reality in more places and ways.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think you're really bringing forward also the cultural aspect of how we consider, like you say, the clinical care option, but also being open to clinical trials and participating it in different ways. But even as organizations, so from an organizational perspective, and obviously you're not going to drive the benefit broadly enough, especially when we're looking at underrepresented, more represented populations. So how do you think organizations can better ensure that we have broad representation?
Well, some of the things that are starting to help, right, is that we are starting to look at more care settings as a place to bring value to patients where they already are. So look, we all have seen some of the failures and missteps. Those are the first attempts in learning, the people who've been brave enough to go out there and try different things. But places like Walgreens, places like Walmart, they both have interesting programs that are helping to promote value-based care. Walmart does some really interesting things with their employees, with second opinions on conditions, and they have some great research they've put out about that, as well as interesting work that they've done with the VA. And then you look at a company like Walgreens, who has not given up the good fight of bringing clinical research into the communities. What it comes down to, though, is it really does come back to trust. And trust is that secret magic ingredient for everything. And it's twice as important, 10 times as important in healthcare, and maybe 20 times as important in clinical research with the background that we have with communities of color. And it comes back to being willing to build something called effective trust. And I can't claim credit for that. Two very brilliant people at a company called Acclinate have gone and shared that concept about building effective trust within communities. And what that really starts with is listening to people for their lived experience, and then meeting people where they are, where they want to be met, and doing it in such a way that respects their autonomy. And that includes with their data, with their medical data. It includes with giving them the opportunity to say, hey, I don't want you coming into my home. I know you think that's easier for me. I want to go somewhere else. It means, hey, this might be the first time as an elderly person, I get out this weekend. I want to go see somebody. I want to go interface with people for my care. So building effective trust matters for every community. And that only starts with meeting people and having empathy for their lived experience instead of us saying, here's the system, live with it.
Yeah, I think a really important note about that is meeting patients where they are, but also where they want to be. And that lived experience even comes with the condition that they're suffering from. So it also brings into question or consideration about real world evidence. It's looking at the clinical trial, but also in the clinical trial setting, but also within that clinical trial, understanding that real world aspect of what the subject is living with on a day-to-day basis, and getting even more insight on how that data can be applied. So when you look at data and the digital health tools aspects, predictive analysis as well, analytics, machine learning, and how that gets integrated into value-based care to identify at-risk populations. And of course, these tools can bring about how you tailor the interventions and also the real-world evidence aspect we were just talking about. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question so much. First of all, let's just pretend we're in a magic world where we have now built adult relationships with patients one-to-one, where we are not taking data from multiple sources, unconsented, combining it, and expecting this to be the way that we build a longitudinal health record for a patient. So let's pretend we're in this beautiful, trust-based data world. If that's true, then the potential of digital health to impact a patient's lives and to improve value-based care is so exponential. Part of that is we have hit a tipping point where value-based care can be enabled by digital health solutions. But that also means we have to come back to taking the long game. We have built so many useless companion apps that we call digital health. There are things that we could be doing to improve data literacy and health literacy that are critical. And so there's this great opportunity now, and people have created smart ports that tell us when a patient is getting an infection before they're sick. So if we have this potential at our fingertips, if we could respect that by pairing it with giving patients the data and the digital and the health literacy they deserve, we'd really be onto something amazing.
Another important point, I think, really considering not just the digital tools, but what outcome are you trying to drive from the technology as well, and how that integrates into the care system you talked about earlier. A really important point that can also actually feed into the choices of what digital tools you do end up using in the trial, because you're focusing on what outcomes are you trying to drive. So when you're looking at all these different data sources, electronic health records, wearables, remote patient monitoring, patient-reported data as well, integrating that data can be quite challenging. And so what do you think are the specific challenges that arise when you're trying to integrate that data and creating a more holistic view on value-based care?
Yeah, that is a tricky question. I'll put my former head of enterprise data governance hat on and just say that we really have to start taking some of the core fundamentals of data management more seriously. We need to truly be thinking about fair data. So is our data findable? Is it interoperable? Is it reusable? But in order for all of those things to be true, it starts all the way back with consent and trust, number one. Number two, we've got to stop the proliferation of platforms that only solve one small piece of the puzzle. We really need to continue to lead with solutions that are interoperable with one another. The burden that we put on our healthcare professionals around technology is incredibly significant. And now we've hit this point where we have the amazing evolution of AI that most of us, we've seen coming in life sciences for a long time. Computational research has been a thing for a long time, but I think now, we're in this sort of brave new world. And I think what people don't recognize is, and I had a chat with a really brilliant Stanford professor earlier this week, and he sort of said, we have this opportunity to sort of start building from scratch. Like, we don't have to take all this dirty data and feed it into our algorithms and make the algorithms as dirty as our data. We actually can look at the potential of what we could build, and we could take something, we could build something clean, we could make it interoperable, we could do it from scratch, and we could go from there. And so we do have a unique opportunity, I think, to abandon some of the ways that we did data management in the past and start to think about it in a whole new way so that we don't repeat the mistakes or create unintended consequences as we try to integrate all of the data that's up on us.
Yeah, amazing point, Angela. I think you're really bringing forward why perpetuate complexities. Let's kind of simplify down to the core information, the core outcomes we're looking for. So as a wrap up, Angela, what would you say? You've seen both sides of the system, both as a clinical researcher, advocate, but as well as on the patient side, and seeing the value of the importance of value-based care, even in your own personal situation, what would be your kind of call to action to overcome barriers and on driving value-based care?
Yeah. So it might be a slightly controversial tip, but my call to action is participate in a trial yourself. Many of us sit in a place where we are responsible for creating the tools, the technology, the data strategies, the solutions, or giving care. And we are far enough removed from the day-to-day experience that we forget. I'm on trial number 9 in my life, and I believe deeply that clinical research has the power to impact all the social causes we care about. So I believe that if you participate in a trial that, even as a controlled, placebo-controlled, non-interventional trial for mental health, you could stop homelessness, because a lot of our unhoused people are grappling with mental illness or substance abuse. So I think the exponential potential we have, let's see how many times I can use exponential today, but clearly I'm passionate about this, to impact beyond even healthcare into the things that really matter to us. It starts with participating. And then when you do, you have experiences like I have, which is you sit and you're with your study coordinator at your visit, and they ask you to go through and rewrite the way you wrote the date in your consent form, 15 minutes out of your visit, because you wrote, it in the global format instead of the US format. And the fact that that's what we're still taking our study coordinators' time with, right? Or I'm not getting the e-diary notifications. Maybe those actually don't work. And when a patient says it doesn't mean they're not being compliant with the app that we gave them. So participate. It gives you your own perspective. It gives you that opportunity to have that lived experience and to share it with others. And I think empathy is the number one thing we can bring to our jobs. It is so much more valuable than convening a patient panel to get feedback on your protocol or your solution. So that's my action. Participate, everybody.
Incredible, Angela. Thank you so much. A great call to action. And you got to be in it to win it, so to speak. But also focus on that outcome if you want to actually drive value, really focus on the value itself.